Sleepy Time Tales, the sleep aid podcast aimed at helping you to get a restful night. I want to apologize for this episode going up a little bit late, but I think it's worked out for the best because something happened that occurred to me that I need to do something a little bit unusual tonight. I got some very nice feedback on Facebook again, and that made me think that I want to just take a little bit of time to reach out to the people that have reached out to me. This recording a podcast thing sometimes feels a little bit strange and lonely. I spend time every week talking to myself and recording, and I send it out into the world. And while I see the stats and I know people are listening and subscribing, those who've taken the time to reach out, I just want you to know that I really appreciate you. It was very early days. It was like in the first month of my podcast when I got my first comment on Facebook, which was from Jess. It was very, very appreciated, and I have to tell you, to know for sure that I am helping somebody. So thank you, Jess, for being the first person to reach me out and make sure that I knew that there was somebody listening and somebody who I was helping. And also to Stephanie, who is currently my only Patreon subscriber. I've mentioned before that the reason I started the Patreon was simply because in May, it happened the 7th of May actually, Patreon decided to make some major changes to the system for new subscribers. So I basically just decided I wanted to squat on my name more than anything else. But Stephanie appreciates what I do enough to give me $5 a month for it. And thank you very much. And anybody else who wants to, obviously you're welcome to, but don't feel pressured, because I do feel like maybe I'm providing a service, but I don't blame anybody for not being 100% sure if they want to give me money every month for it. But Stephanie, I do appreciate, so thank you. And the person who inspired me to make this little section today was Jared, who gave me a really nice little piece of feedback and made a nice recommendation. So thank you, Jared. He's also waiting very impatiently for this new episode. So sorry for the delay, but here it is for you. Thank you very much. And I also want to encourage people who listen to sort of get in touch and maybe, I do this to help people, and well, I believe I do, and I'm glad that I do. It's just a cool feeling to get some feedback. So thank you to those who've taken the time. Anybody else who's so inclined, please feel free to. Although also don't be pressured. I know, it's effort that you don't necessarily want to make. But you can always pop an email or send a message on Facebook or a little comment on Twitter or iTunes review or something like that. Anything that, any way that you can reach back, it's a cool feeling. Like, there's something about podcasts that I find that I listen to that, it's a very intimate feeling. It's a very intimate medium. I listen to quite a few, and I feel attached to the people that I listen to in ways that are maybe stronger than logical in a lot of ways. It's quite strange. But there's something about this medium that is quite intimate. But from the podcaster side, it can feel a little bit lonely, especially solitary. I don't feel lonely. I've got people in my life, but this podcast feels a little bit solitary, especially because I don't have a person I'm podcasting with. So anyone who just wants to say hi and just say hi or give some feedback, anything like that, it would be much appreciated, and don't feel shy. It would be very welcome, anything. So as I said, good evening friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you really can't solve them right now, and so maybe with a good night's sleep you'll be able to deal with them a little bit better in the morning. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns, but slowly letting go and drifting into the deep night, into a restful sleep. Before we go any further tonight, I need to take care of some business. It's the sort of thing that usually happens at the end of most podcasts, but since I'm hoping you're asleep by the time we get that far, I need to mention the stuff right now. Firstly, you can find this podcast, all the episodes, as well as blog posts, musings, and sometimes production notes on our website, sleepytimetales.net. Comments, questions, suggestions can all be emailed to contact@sleepytimetales.net. You can find links to all of our relevant social media on the website, but you can go straight from here to our Twitter, which is @sleepytimetales, and Facebook, which is @sleepytimetalespodcast. I have been getting some rather nice feedback, not a lot, but it's starting to come in, and I appreciate everything that I hear from people. It's nice to know that people are being helped. This podcast is definitely not for everybody, so if you're somebody that I reach, let me know. It feels good to know that we're helping out. It's also nice to see, looking through some of my stats, that I've got a few subscribers, which, listeners is nice. People who actually subscribe, who want to hear what you have to say. I just want to give a shout out to you folks. You are extra special. So thank you for the support, thank you for the kind words, and thank you for your subscriptions already. They're all much appreciated. We also have a channel on YouTube where I will be putting up simple visualized enhanced versions of the episodes for your enjoyment. Some people like to leave the YouTube playing in the background, and flashing lights may help a little bit. You can search for Sleepy Time Tales podcast there, or follow the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes on the website is a link to the podcast newsletter. If you're interested in hearing up-to-date info and news, and I'm not too sure what else, maybe specials or products that I think may help people get a restful night, subscribe, and I'll promise not to spam you. I'll only send stuff out that I think is genuinely interesting. Now, if you're enjoying the show and or finding it useful, if it's helping you a couple of nights a week, or if you're like me and you leave your sleep aid podcast running in the background so the droning voices can sing you to sleep, it would be much appreciated if you could give me a little bit of support to help some of the costs. I was going to hold off a few months on starting a Patreon because I wanted to have a body of work to justify it first. But Patreon recently announced some changes that will make it more expensive and less useful for new creators starting campaigns after May 2019. So I figured I'd just hold my nose and jump in and get started. So if you're interested, it's there. If it reaches a stage where there's enough for it to be compelling, it's there for you whenever you're ready, but no pressure. But the show is free, so what reason could you have to actually pay me for it? There are a couple of reasons. Firstly, maybe you'd just like to. It's a service I provide mainly to help people, and if you think that it's something you'd like to support and you're finding it useful, that may be reason enough for you. But if you'd like to get a bit of a sweetener, I do have some rewards levels available on the Patreon. There are 3 at the moment. I'm keeping things quite simple. If you can afford $1 a month, I will genuinely appreciate that. I live in a country where $1 is actually a usable amount of money. So if you want to back me at $1 a month, I will, with your permission, list your name or alias on a thank you page on the Sleepy Time Tales website, sleepytimetales.net. Now, while a single $1 is genuinely a usable amount of money, add 4 more to make 5, and we have a very useful amount of money. To thank you for reaching that deeply, I'll provide you with an RSS feed of episodes that don't have this whole down to business section in it, where I'm rattling a can asking you for money. Also, while I don't have any advertising on the show, if that ever changes, any $5 and up patrons will receive ad-free episodes in their custom feed. If you really love what I do and can kick $10 a month in my direction, you will really get 1 extra episode every month. I'll do a full movie recap review that will be chosen in a poll by users. If I can come up with anything else that is worthwhile for higher level patrons, I will, but right now $10 is the cap. You can find the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales or patreon.sleepytimetales.net. If a monthly commitment is a bit too much for you, which is also understandable, I do have a tip jar up on my website, where you can throw a bit of spare change my way whenever you're so inclined. And again, I'll repeat myself, literally a single dollar is useful. If that is what you can afford and you feel it isn't going to help, be assured it will, and it will be appreciated. Another way you can help without costing yourself anything extra is checking out the affiliate links on many episodes and on the website. I link to items that are related to the theme of an episode in the show description, and the website has links to sleep aid podcasts, appliances, and even some very nice looking beds. So take a look if you're on the market. Another way you can help without actually costing yourself any money is rate and review the podcast on whatever your service of choice is. The show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. I was using SoundCloud, but I ran out of space on the free service, so I think I'm going to cut that until I can cover a subscription on that. But of course, if you found it, you already know where to find it. A 5-star review will get the show in front of more people, and the more people who find it, the more people have a chance of helping find a good night's sleep. Also, any interesting or funny reviews that I get, I will read out at the end of an episode. And also, if this show helps you find a good night's sleep, it may help others. So other than reviews, also please share the show on your social media, or to any friends or family you think it may help. Even if it doesn't help you, it may help somebody else, because everyone who suffers sleepless nights is usually open to options. Even if it doesn't necessarily work for one person, it may work for someone else. The music in this episode, and all episodes thus far, is Un Désert Bakumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as there's some very cool stuff released under various different names that I definitely would recommend checking out, especially if you need music for media of your own. That's enough of business. Now back to the fun part. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales, and what is a sleep aid podcast? To answer your question, let me start with a common problem. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, your mind spinning and your emotions in turmoil with the anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave and I'm your narrator, here to talk you into a restful night. I am someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them, I always struggled to sleep a lot. It was actually quite recently, in the last 5 years or so, that I discovered that droning male voices have a tendency to put me to sleep. I was listening to video game podcasts at night, and I would find myself waking up with the theme music at the end and having missed everything that had gone before. Eventually I started listening to podcasts deliberately to help me sleep, and eventually one day I found that sleep aid podcasts are actually a thing. I discovered first Sleep With Me, which cheeky name, but actually a rather good podcast, very similar format to the one that I make. Obviously it worked very well for me, so when I was inspired to start my own, that was very, very much in a similar vein. Sleep With Me was specifically designed for the purpose of distracting the restless mind. It's, as I said, it worked very well for me, but when I recommended it to others, not everybody liked the narrator's voice. While I hadn't discovered anything else quite like it, I figured I've got a boring, drony voice, so maybe I should make my own podcast. And here it is. Welcome to Sleepy Time Tales. Every episode starts off with this long intro, which is here for a reason. The main thing is that I want to introduce new listeners. There's new ones every episode come on board, and welcome to you. I want to introduce you guys to the structure and the sort of thought processes behind the show. So obviously I want you to get used to my voice before we get to story time and get an idea of what we're doing. This intro goes on for quite a while to help you get into the mental space. For you new listeners and older listeners alike, now's the time for you to sort of calm down, get the lights out, turn your lights out, maybe have some water, make sure you're going to be as comfortable and unstressed as possible, and listen to my voice and get used to it, and get used to my rhythms and the tone of my voice, and maybe my accent, which to some of you might be a little bit strange. I'm from South Africa. You may have seen South African accents on other things, which are usually very bad. Lethal Weapon 2, worst South African accents in history, incidentally. Sort of combined Austrian-Australian. It's nightmarish. None of us sound like that. So this is the chance for you to get used to my babbling and my going around and talking nonsense, and turn your lights out and get used to this space. What we are going to do is you and I, listener, are going to build a space together. A sort of mental nest, something that you can pull your mind into to help you, to help focus your mind and protect it from outside thoughts. The idea is you listen to me closely as I go through this intro, which will run probably roughly 15 minutes, and then the story that follows and the music that I've selected, which is quite a nice, soothing, calming music. What you do is you listen closely to me as I speak, and then that will stop your mind from spinning and wandering off into your stresses and your worries. Use my voice and the story as a little bit of an anchor. You hold on to what I'm telling you very lightly. You very lightly hold on and sort of allow yourself to drift. Tonight's story is the third chapter in a story that has gone in very different directions to what I intended when I started. It's a story about a young boy, probably 5 or 6 years old, who has adventures in the forest. They were originally supposed to be adventures with animals, sort of Winnie the Pooh type things, but I just cannot come up with anything like that. A.A. Milne was a singular genius, and I'm not that good. So I talk nonsense based on fairy tales and folklore, and I promise you now, a young man is not going to be in any kind of danger, because I do not do children in peril stories. I hate to listen to them, and I'm definitely not going to be passing that sort of thing on to anybody. So anyway, it's important that as I run through this intro and through the music and through the story, that you don't try to force yourself to sleep. You need to just, as I said, keep a light grip on my voice, sort of a light mental grip, so that when the time comes, that grip can just let go and you can drift off into sleep rather than listen to the story, which, to be frank, is probably not all that interesting anyway, so it shouldn't be too challenging for you. Ideally, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the story, but don't feel pressurized. It's very important that you don't stress about things. It may not work on the first night. It may take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. My accent may be strange to you. Maybe you need more than one episode tonight. Generally speaking, it takes a while to develop a habit, maybe 2 or 3 nights before you're actually comfortable enough with me in your ears to be able to just let go. But again, it's very important that you relax. If you're new to the show and you're prone to late nights staring at the ceiling, it may take a while, so be patient with yourself. So queue up a few episodes or run to the backlog. What I do with Sleep Aid podcasts is I just put them to stream and I put the earbuds in and I just sleep all night. If I wake up at 3 a.m, the stream is often still running and I just make sure my earbuds are firmly in again and I carry on listening and I fall back asleep. Sometimes even if I wake up half an hour before my alarm, which is one of my most annoying insomniac habits, carry on, and very often I just fall back asleep and I have sometimes the best 30 minutes of sleep that whole night. Those last 30 minutes can be incredibly restful. There's something about just letting yourself go right before your alarm that just is so deeply satisfying. I don't recommend anybody wake up half an hour before the alarm on purpose, but if you do, give it a try. It's pretty amazing. So anyway, you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend, the person who has elected to lie in the dark listening to my voice. You'll always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my part, my small part, to help you face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. I want you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention of this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and just drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep, and let my voice wash over you and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and what's supposed progress that tends to shine bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you're not hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Buddy digs deep. Those of you who've been following along for a while will remember our little friend Buddy. I've never been very specific about his age, but he's sort of been a late toddler, young child. So bear that sort of thing in mind as we go forward. Imagine the joy and innocence and open-eyed wonder of a child who's exposed to things that to many are almost beyond imagination. I'll make you a reminder that I'll give you the reminder rather that every episode I've given so far about Buddy is that nothing is going to happen to him. While he is going to have wonderful adventures, he's, if anything, a bit of a blessed child, and the world is not ever going to knock him down or harm him, at least maybe when he gets older, but not in any of the stories I tell you. Me, I'm a father, and even before I was a parent, the idea of like children in peril stories just don't do it for me. Not at all. I just don't. They just terrify me and pull me out, and I don't enjoy any idea that children are in danger. So I'm going to tell you right now, with this story, Buddy is never going to be in any danger. So yes, you'll remember we've gone along with Buddy when he went to the forest with a bear, foraging and eating nuts and berries and refusing to eat bugs while he went along. And then there was the time that he met the gnomes in his father's workshop / garage / barn in the backyard of their house. And those gnomes took him to visit their king and told them stories about their fights with goblins and the adventures that they had. So this is where we pick up with young Buddy. Imagine a young child, maybe 5 or 6, old enough to get into mischief, but his head is generally quite screwed on straight. He's a good boy with a sense of adventure, but he doesn't really get himself into trouble. He's been visiting now for a while with the gnome friends that he made, with Freddy the gnome, who first took him to the king, and the lady friends Crystal and Carol, who last time I kept switching through their names, and so this time I've written them down and I'll remember them from now. He met the Gnome King Evander and saw their rustic but magnificent home, the king's home that was covered with gems dug from the deep. One thing we learned from the times before was that the gnomes every now and then came into conflict with the goblins that lived deeper under the earth. The goblins never really went to the surface and had a tendency to steal things from the gnomes, often things that the gnomes had, air quotes, borrowed from the people around them, including Buddy's own family. In return, the gnomes often stole gems and gold and pretty things from the goblins that they mined. Buddy often visited the Gnome King in the course of that summer, out in the caves, deep in the forest, or the caves were not very far from the house, but they were in places where people tend not to go, buried deep in the thicket brush where only the smallest gnomes and curious children with the help of gnomes could go. The caves were deep and dark at first, but once you got out of sight of the light from the entrance, they were well lit and well lit for the so that young Buddy could keep his footing easily. Buddy would often visit the king, named Evander. I gave him that name because it's an ancient Roman name with a quite an important meaning, I think, which unfortunately I didn't take a note of. Really need to pay more attention to that sort of thing. But it's a good name nonetheless, whatever it means. So the Gnome King Evander and Buddy often spent a lot of time together. They would have deep conversations through most of the day. I call him the King because it was the title he took. But he was a pretty down-to-earth character. He wasn't like a human nobility as we understand it. He was a village headman and a judge more than a divine ruler or anything like that. Then the gnomes didn't hold with the divine right of kings. Actually, honestly, in human terms, that is a fairly modern development. Came late in the terms of the Roman Emperor. I think Roman Empire, if I remember correctly, it was the Emperor Diocletian who introduced the idea of divine kings and divine emperors. Before then, the chiefs and kings of most civilizations, at least in Europe and the West, were basically just the guy who could beat the others off, and actually more often than not wanted the job because it was often more responsibility than fun. So Buddy often visited the Gnome King, the headman and chieftain and judge. They would have long conversations in the afternoons, while in between times Evander sometimes had some official duties. He would intercede in arguments and fights and help name children, and he was also a healer. He used to help when gnomes got hurt in little scraps, although they never really got hurt. But they did sometimes have little scraps with the goblins, and they would come with scratches and bruises every now and then. Maybe a black eye and a bit of a scratch on the hand, but they would always come waving a beautiful ruby or emerald, some kind of gemstone from deep in the earth. So the king and Buddy would have their conversations, with frequent interruptions, but they learnt a lot about each other's lives. Although, to be honest, I think Evander and the other gnomes knew most of the things that happened with Buddy and his family and people like them and friends and neighbours. They just seemed to like to hear Buddy telling the story. He had a tendency to make things sound very exciting, so they enjoyed him as a storyteller rather than as a person bringing news, because they used to hide in the corners in the dark, sometimes even in the house, and see exactly everything that went on. So there was very little that was actually a mystery for the gnomes, but he learnt a lot about the gnome society themselves. The gnomes often would go out into the woods and help animals that were hurt. They had a fondness for healing, particularly birds and other small mammals. Not other small mammals, but it's not a mammal. They loved to heal and help. They would help fix birds' nests and dig burrows. Gnomes as earth spirits are great movers of sand and earth and stone. They would often help foxes and other small burrowing creatures, even little rabbits and rats and things like that, help dig burrows in before winter time, and help them prepare for the long winters. They would look after hibernating creatures and make sure they kept healthy and secure. They considered themselves something like stewards of the woods. They were not the only nature spirits out there, but they were the ones who were most connected to the life of the forest. They would also often cut undergrowth and clear paths for smaller animals, but they had a tendency, which was quite clever of them, to make sure that if there was always areas where humans didn't really go, or if humans went, that they would probably not notice. They were very secretive and scared of people, obviously, because, let's be honest, human beings generally are a dangerous bunch to things they don't know and don't understand. Buddy was one of the few humans they'd spent any amount of time with in the last few centuries, because Buddy was such a loving and sweet boy with such an innocent nature that they knew they were safe with him. And they also knew that he also had a wild imagination that his family knew about, so if he came and told friends, the gnomes, the family would probably not really believe him, so the secret, even if they did talk, was pretty safe. Buddy's favourite stories that Evander told, though, were the stories about the goblins. Evander used to tell Buddy that the gnomes and the goblins were great enemies, but even in Buddy's limited understanding, his limited experiences as a very young boy, he had a feeling that the enmity between the goblins and the gnomes wasn't very deep and bitter. It felt to him as though they were more schoolyard rivals than anything more serious than that. Evander told stories about fights that they had, and Buddy every now and then would see some gnomes come in scratched and bruised from fights, but there was never anything serious. They would never look deeply hurt, or there were never any bites or major things. A few pulled hairs and black eyes and bruised cheeks, a couple of scratches, but it never seemed like a war. Buddy had limited experience of things like that, but he did see TV that sometimes maybe he shouldn't have. Like many young children these days, parents can be a little bit careless with what children watch, and so he had an idea of what a serious fight looked like, and the gnomes never looked like they'd had serious fights in even the most vicious encounter with goblins. So Buddy had a sense that maybe things were not as bitter and rancorous as Evander liked to make it sound. And so one day, after he'd gotten to know Evander and the other gnomes really well, he asked if he could go see the goblins again. You may remember last time he had gone with Freddy and Crystal and Carol to go and watch some goblins work. They didn't go very deep underground at that time. They went to the closest area where there were like 5 or 6 goblins scratching away at the cave walls, pulling out a few gems. But from stories with Evander, Buddy had learned that there were much larger caverns further down, where goblins would work in the hundreds. They would mostly digging tunnels and collecting beautiful gemstones that they would then leave in piles all over the place. They would guard them from the gnomes, but not too jealously, and would try to stop the gnomes from grabbing too many of them, but didn't put too much effort into it from the sounds of it. So Buddy asked Evander several times if he could be taken to one of the bigger goblin mining areas, and eventually one day, after several weeks, Evander said yes. He called Buddy's friend Freddy to come and fetch him, and just went with Crystal, and the 3 of them went exploring. It took quite a while. They were very sneaky going on the tunnels that weren't too deep. The tunnels were very well dug and the roofs were firm. There was, tunnels under the ground can be very dangerous things, tendencies to rock falls and things collapsing. But the goblin tunnels, because that's what they were, they'd been dug out with tools very carefully, were actually, they looked rough, but they were marvels of engineering. They were very, very firmly built. The roofs were well propped, and there was even a decent amount of headroom for young Buddy, although he was far taller than even the tallest gnome or tallest of the goblins. I don't think I gave you a major description of what the goblins looked like last time, when Buddy had gone to peek with his friends. In a lot of ways, goblins look a lot like gnomes. They're not like the goblins and orcs out of Tolkien or anything like that. They're much more sort of regular humanoids, where gnomes are short and chubby and stocky little humanoids, human-looking creatures. Goblins are a little bit taller and skinnier, but not much taller. They're still smaller than 5-year-old Buddy, who was tall but not giant for his age. They had long, skinny arms and legs, and at first glance, they probably looked like claws, but they just had long nails, which were very hard, and that they used to help dig in the dirt, although they also used tools for the more serious mining. They had long, scraggly hair and long, scraggly beards, but it was very thin and wispy. They were also extremely pale because they never got any sun. It was very, very rare for a goblin to be out in the sunlight. Goblins very rarely went up to the surface at all, actually. They didn't like not having anything over their heads. They were scared of many of the creatures in the wild, and many of the creatures in the wild weren't as familiar with goblins as they were with gnomes, and every now and then, if a bear would come along, a goblin would maybe explore having one for dinner. So goblins avoided the outside as much as they could, and they avoided the sunlight completely. So they were skinny and pale. They tended to look a little bit dirty because they were mining all the time, although they were actually quite fastidious and bathed at least twice a week, no matter how much work they were doing. And because they didn't like the smell of each other any more than other people would not like the smell of them. So Buddy went with Freddy and Crystal. They snuck around some of the goblin tunnels, the very well built, and although dark, they weren't lit at all. Buddy had a torch that he took with him when he found out that Evander was going to allow him to go explore the goblin caves. He snuck it out of his dad's toolbox. He had a torch and he had a headlamp. His father used to like using a headlamp to work under the hood of his car that he was working on, the old Ford truck. So he had a little bit of light, just enough that also they didn't want to attract too much attention. The gnomes also had sharp hearing and sharp smell, so they knew when they were getting close to some goblins digging up in the smaller mining areas, and they would put the lights out and sneak past them very carefully, because they didn't want to be discovered until they got into, well, they didn't want to be discovered at all, but they definitely didn't want to be discovered before they got into the deeper areas, and Buddy could see exactly what a large goblin mining cave looked like. They carried on and they carried on. They snuck past several parties of goblins that were going up and down the tunnels. The goblins mostly seemed to be collecting rubies and that sort of thing, and beautiful semi-precious stones rather than anything. Well, rubies obviously are quite valuable, but otherwise mostly just pretty tiger's eyes and beautiful quartzes and stuff like that they were taking further down. And except for the ones that were coming up to do some mining. They went past a few small mining faces like the first one Buddy had seen when he had first arrived there. But they made it very, very deep. It took probably an hour and a half of traveling for them to get to an area where suddenly Buddy realized he had been hearing for a while the sound of a lot of tools working. The gnomes got a little bit nervous because while they often raided goblin settlements and goblin mines for pretty gemstones, it had been a long time since they'd been near anything quite this size. So they got very nervous and very careful. Freddy and Crystal used all of their gnome skills to slink through the dark and duck. As I mentioned before, that gnomes can pass through earth and rock as though it's water. So they used that to help them sneak around. Obviously, they couldn't help Buddy out with that, but they made sure that he had safe footing so he didn't make too much noise. And they made sure that his lights were out so that he wouldn't be seen. Goblins could see very well in the dark, but they didn't want his torches and his headlamp flashing all over the place, attracting attention at least any more than they absolutely had to. Buddy and Freddy and Crystal were sneaking down towards the goblin cave. They came out to a tunnel that was opening up, and Buddy couldn't believe his eyes. It was a magnificent sight. He saw hundreds of goblins. They were swarming over the walls and the ceiling and the floor, digging, and they had picks and shovels and tools and chisels, and they were digging away. Some sections of the areas where they were working looked almost like a dance of movement. The goblins worked amazingly gracefully in conditions that looked quite actually unpleasant and rough. The large cavern that they were digging in was well lit. It had torches and lanterns, even a couple of it had flame torches, like medieval torches, and it even had some battery torches. A couple of them looked a little bit familiar to Buddy. It was ones that they thought they'd lost fairly recently. Some of them they'd probably been borrowed by the gnomes and then stolen by the goblins to help them work in the dark. As I said, goblins could see well in the dark, but it was always more pleasant for them to work with a little bit of light. And this, especially when they were digging up gems, it was much easier to see them when the area was as well lit as possible. So the gnomes were the goblins rather, were crawling over the ceiling and the roof and the ceiling and the walls, digging away, working ferociously. But he was quite impressed with watching this whole process happening. What impressed him even more was when he looked in the middle of the cavern and he saw huge fires with huge pots. The goblins had food cooking in the middle. There were chef goblins throwing in unidentifiable little bits of meat and a lot of mushrooms and sort of fungi that grow in the dark. But he could actually smell the food, and it smelled actually quite amazing. Although he knew right away he probably wouldn't enjoy eating it because it looked like there were a lot of things like worms and bugs being thrown in. Obviously, goblins had to eat what was available to them deep under the earth, so burrowing creatures were probably the best options that they had. And of course, the fungi and things that grow in the dark and the dark corners, away from the light where there's no sun. There was no spinach and broccoli here because obviously green stuff doesn't work at all. They're deep underground, and the goblins will not go above ground. Actually, Buddy did notice a few interesting looking vegetables. He had a suspicion that those had also been stolen from the gnomes. The gnomes, one thing I didn't mention about them was that deep in the forest they have beautiful gardens where they would grow vegetables and then pick them and bring them back to the main settlement, to the town where they all lived. So, as well as tools and useful things like torches, the goblins did occasionally steal vegetables and possibly other food items as well. But the gnomes always had plenty, so they didn't. They obviously, if they saw the goblins stealing something, they would chase them around and try to stop them. But they never really took it all that seriously. As I say, the gnome-goblin relationship seems at first glance rather fraught, but they seem to almost have a mutually beneficial relationship rather than anything really, really competitive. While the goblins didn't provide anything really useful to the gnomes, the gnomes did steal the core of their decorations from the goblin mines, and the goblins in return probably felt that it was their arts to help themselves to some food and tools every now and then, because after all, while they were digging mostly for their own benefits and to grow their own settlements deep under the ground, the gnomes were benefiting from them as well. So the gnomes hid in the rocks, peeking out at the goblins. Buddy was slowly and carefully going out, trying not to attract attention, and it wasn't very hard because the goblins were all quite hard at work and weren't inclined to watch the comings and goings through the tunnels around them, until eventually Buddy accidentally knocked a rock. They were a little bit up a slope from the kitchen area of the center of the cavern. So the rock that he knocked ran down the slope and knocked a few more, and those ran down, and these fall of sand and earth fell onto the fire on one of the pots, where large pots was cooking on. It wasn't enough to put the fire out, but it was enough for the goblin cooks to have to pay close attention for a while. And then when they looked to see where the sand came from, they didn't see the gnomes, which were hiding literally in the rocks, not just behind the rocks. But they did see young Buddy, who obviously couldn't hide in the rocks at all. The goblins were a little bit taken aback at first. Obviously a human had never been down any close to that depth. They had heard of humans, and some of them, the braver ones who had wandered into the woods at night, had probably encountered humans at some stage, or maybe had heard stories of those who had encountered humans. There were sometimes hunters deep in the forest that the goblins may have seen, and so they had, if a hunter is the only human being you've seen, you may be a little bit scared of them and think that we're a vicious bunch. I mean, human beings are a vicious bunch, but we're not all hunters, so despite our failings, we're not always a danger to the things that we find, at least not on an individual basis. So the goblins didn't realize that Buddy was a very small human. After all, he was already bigger than them. The few that had seen humans knew that they generally were a lot bigger than Buddy, but they didn't really know how human growth cycles work or relative sizes. So at first they were a little bit alarmed. Most of them continued to work, but the ones around the cooking area and the ones that were mining near there came to investigate. They were all rather nervous at the process and didn't really know, as I said, they didn't really know what to make of Buddy, but he just calmly sat there holding his hands up and smiling at them. The goblins came and investigated. A couple of them poked at him lightly with their long nails. The one that was poking, the nails were a little bit sharp, but nothing too bad, so it didn't really scratch him. But they were curious nonetheless. The goblins that were cooking kept their nails short for cleaning purposes, so those ones maybe poked him a little bit more vigorously, and they realized he was soft and squishy and probably not much of a danger to them. And his friendly smile completely disarmed them fairly quickly, and they realized that he wasn't really a threat to them. After a while, Freddy and Crystal realized that nothing was happening to Buddy and he was okay, so that they came out of their hiding in the rocks. The goblins were even more surprised to see the gnomes coming out into the open. While they did have more of a relationship with gnomes than they had with humans, the relationship tended to be them chasing each other around, not coming out and looking a little bit embarrassed and nervous, which obviously Buddy and Crystal were because they didn't know how this was going to go. Much like the goblins, the gnomes communicated sort of in a almost telepathic way. They spoke directly into Buddy's mind rather than have a conversation in English words. It felt a lot like a conversation to Buddy because he'd been used to speaking to the earthy forest spirit gnomes. so he was pretty used to it. Buddy introduced himself as Buddy. The first two goblins that discovered him, the two cook goblins, introduced themselves as Abelard and Audric. They were chiefly responsible for keeping the work parties fed. It was a very serious responsibility among the goblins that they took quite seriously. Buddy asked them if they were the chiefs or the kings of the goblins, and the goblins found this whole thing quite funny. The goblins didn't really believe in chiefs or kings. They all just did their work. Every now and then they would have tribunals where if they had disputes or any questions or anything like that, some of the older, wiser goblins would form a council and make decisions about things. The goblins all worked together. The thing that goblins liked the most was exploring. There were many great, fascinating mysteries deep in the mountains and the forests, and the goblins loved to find them. They just dug and what they knew that they weren't particularly interested in gems on their own. They didn't decorate their clothing or their housing. They just lived in like alcoves carved into the rocks. But they knew that the gnomes and other creatures liked the bright shiny things, so they took them out and they polished them and they left them where they could be found. They also made a bit of a show about chasing them around, because to them it seemed like that was what the gnomes liked. They weren't particularly interested in stopping them, but to them it was a game. Sometimes the games got a little bit rough, hence the odd bruise and scratch on the gnomes. But it was much like to the goblins, it was almost like a full contact playground soccer game rather than an actual war or fight. So they explored deep in the earth and dug out the valuables or the beautiful things. They did appreciate a good gem, and they knew how to work them into wonderful shapes, but they weren't interested in them on their own right. They just liked to explore and occasionally hunt the creatures that dig in the dark for their food. Abelard offered Buddy some food, but as I said, Buddy had been watching them cook using grubs and worms, and while these grubs and worms were cooked, much like when he went exploring with the bear, he wasn't particularly fond of eating or interested in eating that sort of thing. So he very politely said no thank you. He had some food at the gnome palace on his way down, and he brought some fruit with him and he ate some of that. But he was also a generous boy, and the gnomes were very interested in the fruit that he had brought. They did steal it sometimes from the gnomes, but they were always happy to have an apple or a pear or something like that, so he obviously shared. After the initial shock of Buddy arriving with his entourage of gnomes, most of the goblins just got back to work. Abelard and Audric was it the name? Audric got back to cooking, and the two other goblins, Odette and Uli, came and collected Buddy and took him to take a look at how the mining operation was going. Buddy saw that the goblins were very skilled. They were very good with their tools, digging and scratching and pulling out gems and expanding the size of the cavern eventually. They seemed to be moving particularly more in one direction. They believed that there was an underground river that way that they wanted to find and explore. The goblins just loved finding new things in the dark. But he didn't know how they knew or believed that there was a river down in the dark there. There was no way that he could see to tell. But they seemed pretty sure, and they seemed to know what they were doing. And they had lived in the dark for thousands of years, so they were probably right. He picked up a pick and tried to help for a second, but he realized that he was not really being much help, and the goblins thanked him for trying, but very gently took the tools away and pointed him back towards the cooking area. He wandered around a while to take a look, and he chatted to a few of the goblins who took some time to have a chat to him. They were completely fascinated by the young man, much as the gnomes had been when they met him for the first time. And while they were hard-working creatures, they weren't really working towards a schedule. They were just doing what they did. Their nature was to dig and explore, and so they just dug and explored. But they also were gregarious and friendly and liked to take some time. So when the gregarious and friendly young boy came along, they took their time to welcome him and make him feel happy and as if he belonged. After a while, though, Buddy realized it was getting late, or rather, Freddy realized it was getting late. It was important that Buddy got home before his parents realized he was disappeared, and the day was getting long. So Buddy said farewell to everybody, to his new friends the goblins, to Abelard and Aldrich, and Uli and Odette, and he waved to all the others, most of whom were working, but a few waved goodbye to him, and they went very quickly back out to the gnome village. They were a lot less sneaky going out than they were coming in. Word seemed to have spread to the goblins in the tunnels that there had been a visitor, and most of those goblins came out as Buddy and friends came nearby, looked curious and a bit surprised, but were friendly enough as Buddy and Freddy and Crystal and Carol went past. No, Carol didn't come with, sorry, just the three of them. It was getting late when they got to the surface, but he could see that the sun was high when they got to, when they got to the surface, when they got to the gnome village. You could see through the opening in the roof that the sun was right up, and if he didn't get moving very quickly, his mother would be looking for him. So he went quickly and as fast as he could, safely, without tripping and falling. Freddy and Carol this time did come with, but Crystal didn't. They took him home. Again, when he got home, he heard his mother calling him. She came around the side of the barn and found him in the barn, or in the workshop rather. I keep calling it a barn because in my head it looks like one, but as I said, it's not a farm, so it wouldn't actually be a barn as such. She found him looking very dirty, covered in sand and mud. So she thought he'd been getting up to mischief there in the workshop. So she said, "Come now, Buddy, what are you doing in a big mess like that? We got to give you a bath in the middle of the day already." So she took his hand and sat with him. Buddy looked back into the workshop and saw Freddy and Carol waving and gave them all a goodbye, and he went to have his bath. So thanks again for joining me on this episode of the Sleepy Time Tales podcast, the sleep aid podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you get a restful night. New episodes will be, I'm usually releasing new episodes every Sunday night, but I'm a little bit behind schedule at the moment, hence this one coming out a little bit late. But early in the week you will have a new episode to help you get through your night's sleep. So make sure you're subscribed in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you will find links in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.